All right, it looks like we are live. So, hi everyone, my name is Daniel. I'm a sometimes panelist on the Project SIP podcast, and I'm here with Mark and Tom, who are representatives of the Teamsters Union, and they're here to answer some questions for me. So, the general structure of tonight is I'm going to ask them some questions, and we're going to go back and forth for a while about that, and then at the end of the broadcast, we're going to do a live QA or Q&A. So if you guys have any questions, put them in the comments and we'll make sure to get to them. And the general breadth is going to be starting out basically talking about what a union is, a little bit background on unions, their history, stuff like that. And then we're going to go into what the practical steps are to joining a union or forming a union if you want to unionize your workplace. So that all being said, let's start with Mark. Can you tell me kind of how you got to this point, a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting Tom and I tonight. It's a great opportunity to spread the union message. Yes, my name is Mark Maloof. I am an organizer with the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Wouldn't rather be doing anything else. It's my dream job. I love it. I've been with the Teamsters since, I believe, March of 2019. Initially, I was working on the campaign to organize Amazon van drivers out in the Midwest. Now I'm actually on the campaign organizing unrepresented staff at the UC campuses, UC Berkeley included, but UC campuses across the state. I got started in all this back in 2016 in the primary campaign, Bernie Sanders' campaign for the nomination of the Democratic Party. I initially helped form the largest Students for Bernie Sanders chapter in the Northern California, in the Bay Area at Santa Rosa Junior College, and it was only ousted by the size of UC Berkeley's Students for Bernie chapter shortly thereafter. I actually did a short stint with the Nurses Union, National Nurses United, registering student voters as they had supported Bernie Sanders in his primary campaign. After that, I had actually had the fortune of being elected as one of the youngest delegates to the Democratic National Convention from the state of California, from my district, the 5th Congressional District, representing Bernie at the DNC. After that, I was working for an environmental nonprofit when I came across a Teamster member who told me about an opening at the North Bay Labor Council. I applied and I was lucky enough to get it. I was the assistant political director, working on local races for the Labor Council. After that, I became the youngest person elected to the Sonoma County Democratic Party Central Committee, which is the highest governing body of the Democratic Party in the county. After that, I had moved to Southern California to work for the state Democratic Party in its research department as an opposition tracker, which essentially means someone that infiltrates Republican Party campaign events, club meetings, fundraisers, and I would secretly audio record and film. And that brought along some pretty interesting experiences. And we ended up flipping the entire county, every single district, every single congressional district in that county flipped blue. So I'm very proud in helping take part in that. After that, I came back to Northern California and had the fortune of meeting Tom and my brothers at the local, and they brought me on. And that's union organizing has always been my passion, bringing workers together. Crazy story how I actually wanted to do that back before all of this happened. I worked for a kitchenware store in my hometown, and my boss was not the nicest guy around, not the nicest employer. And he was a pretty staunch right-wing conservative. And so when he found that I had a Bernie Sanders sticker on my car, he came on the shop floor and accused me of being a communist in front of a line of customers while I was at the cash register. That experience pushed me to say, hey, you know what? I want to dedicate my life to not only fighting a-holes like that guy, but fighting for people who were in a position like I was, who couldn't do anything about being mistreated by someone above me. And that's why I'm here today.
Cool. Thank you. Really excited to talk more with you about this. Um, and then I guess same question for Tom. Like, what was your path?
Well, so I was raised by a very traditional, like 1930s style brick through the boss's window union man. He was a member of IBW Local 6 in San Francisco, and so I grew up in the hiring hall there on Saturdays, and any day that he wasn't working. He was the kind of guy that used to take me to the longshoremen's hall in San Francisco and have me stand in the outlines of the bodies of the longshoremen that were shot in 1934. And we would talk about the general strike and the power of labor. And it was just a conversation that we had at my dinner table growing up, was the value of labor and the way workers capture that value. So that was kind of like my foundational, like where I got my value set. And after college, I got a job in, who would have thought, totally scabbed. I was driving a beverage delivery truck. It was my first opportunity to drive professionally, and it was a non-union job. And it was the employer as a person and an individual was a really nice guy. He was welcome at my barbecues to this day. But that relationship was exploitive, and I didn't even know it. I thought that I was the luckiest guy. Yeah.
Real quick, can you tell us what a scab is?
A scab is someone that's doing union work but isn't a union member. So they're usually doing it for less than the bargained rate. They're doing it without the benefits, and when you're scabbing, you're undercutting the ability of other people to bargain.
Got it.
So beverage delivery is a traditional Teamster, job, and I was doing what would be bargaining unit work at a non-bargained company, right? I thought $17 an hour at the time, and this was years ago, was good money. And I had medical insurance, and I was paying $300 a month for my medical insurance, and I thought that was decent. I didn't realize how exploited I was until that company got bought out. I got laid off. I had to go searching for a job, and I got hired at a union shop where I was doing virtually the same work at $27 an hour with full employer paid medical. And that job there, I was there for 15 years and had zero out-of-pocket costs. My wife gave me 2 sons, zero out-of-pocket costs. There was no copay, go to the emergency room. And it's not because I was a better truck driver than I had been before or a better truck driver than anybody else, right? But I had all these things that came through collective bargaining, right? Because I was working in a union shop. And I didn't even have to take the personal risk of organizing. That shop was organized in the 70s, right? It was a mature contract. I was just a guy off the street that showed up and just benefited, changed my life, right? From one position to the other. I was the same guy with the same skill set doing the same work. So it reaffirmed all the things that my father had been talking about, and it got me motivated. And when we had an opportunity to negotiate our next collective bargaining agreement, I was excited, and I volunteered to be on the negotiating team. And I negotiated 3 contracts there with my business agent and improved the lives of my members. And then the question, we ran into this wall. It was like, why can't we break $30 an hour, right? And the answer was there were other people in the area doing the same work, just 40 miles away at $14 an hour. How could we reasonably ask the company to pay us more than $27 an hour? How could we reasonably ask for 30? And the answer was we couldn't, because they could find people to do the work at 14, right? So that's where union organizing came in. And I got involved trying to organize that garbage company that was doing the work at $14 an hour. And guess what we did, right? And 4 years later, the people at that company are making $27 an hour. And the guys at that company I was working at are making $35 an hour, because by organizing that group, by tightening the labor market, we made it more expensive to hire drivers doing that same work, and they're getting paid. And at the conclusion of that last agreement, I was motivated and excited, and I'd been working nights, and my wife was making me very aware that I was asleep during the day and not being a father. And I was like, what am I going to do next? What is the next challenge for me? And it was applying to be a business agent with a local union. And I had the relationships there because I'd been doing the work that I'd been doing on a volunteer basis. I had a little bit of a history in business that, helps me understand in negotiations what the person I'm negotiating with needs out of a negotiation. And I got hired. And it's the absolute best job I've ever had. I can't imagine doing anything else. Every single day, I make someone's life better. I help someone get back to work that got terminated inappropriately. I help make sure that people get paid more, right, so that they can support their families. I help coordinate people with their medical benefits. I go out in the middle of the night and talk to people that are working that are, that would be better off organized. Like every day is different and everything I do is righteous, and it's amazing.
Very cool. Okay, so there was a couple words that came up during that that I would, either of you, I would like either of you to define. So there was collective bargaining.
Mhm.
There was what a local is, like what that means. And then, after we tackle those, I would like to get into just, in simplest terms, what a union is. And then if each of you could tell me like what exactly you do.
Okay.
So yeah, whoever
So
wants to take
let's
that.
hit the first two terms. We're collective bargaining and what a local is. So a local is just one level in the structure that is an international union. At one point, a union was just the people at one specific work site getting together to do collective bargaining, and we'll address that in a second, right? But as you had more people in an industry doing that same negotiation, they started sharing resources, right? And that sharing of resources turned into some specialization of skills. And so we have an international, which is the like global organization that is the Teamsters. And that international is divided into what's called regions and joint councils, which are, smaller groups that are more focused and, kind of channel resources down to what is called the local, right? The local is the smallest organization in the Teamsters. That's where, people are on the ground doing the work, kind of getting the resources from the international and channeling them down to the members, making sure that basically it's about efficiency, right? We have people in the local that do nothing other than research on businesses. As a local, right, in Marin, Sonoma, Mendocino, and Lake, we couldn't employ those people, but we have them in DC and we can bring them into the local anytime we need them, right? We've got people that are specialists in certain types of safety. Again, local, the only source of revenue is member dues, which means we have to be lean with that money. We have to be as efficient as possible. So what we have is we have business agents, right? And that's what we have. And every other resource we have comes out of the international or the joint council. Collective bargaining, that's just the concept that that when we negotiate together in a group, we have more strength. If you go into your boss, right, as you, Daniel, I don't know if we use your last name on this podcast, but Daniel Levy, you go to your boss and you're like, look, I've been working on this rig, this EMT rig for, 24-hour shifts, 24 on, 24 off for months now, right? I'm getting $14 an hour. I'm exhausted and I'm worth more. You need to pay me more or I'm going to walk. Your boss is going to look at you and be like, why don't you just fucking walk, dog? I can find someone else to do this work. There's someone else hungry. But if every single person that operates that EMT, that rig, that ambulance, goes to the boss and says, check it out. We're worth more. We're generating more. You're making an obscene amount of money, and all we're asking for is the ability to feed our families and pay our rent. And if you don't find a way to get that to us, we're going to walk. Well, guess what? There's no business with a bunch of trucks sitting there doing nothing, right? The laborers, the workers that are doing that work are the business. And it is in the company's interest to bargain with that collective, right? That's what collective bargaining is. And continue having a business. That's what it is, right? I mean, the Teamsters Union is not against businesses. We're not against businesses making money. We are absolutely against the exploitation of workers. And there is ways to have a business, make money, and still take care of your employees. And I'm going to get rolling here in a second, so let's make room for Mark.
All right. So, Mark, one of the questions was the specifics of what you personally do, and then the other one was, in the simplest term possible, what a union is to you.
What do I do? Well, I'll stress something that I stress to every single worker that I talk to on these campaigns. My job as an organizer isn't to be the organizer for workers. It isn't to have the spotlight, to have the megaphone, right? My job is to push workers toward action. It's to bring workers together, right? My job isn't to be the organizer for them. It's to turn every worker that I find and that I talk to, making them into an organizer themselves, giving them the tools and knowledge that they need to push their coworkers to action, to build the union themselves, right? Because, Tom and I, we both work for the union, right? Our card says, Mark from the union, Tom from the union, but I'm not the union. The union is when workers come together and gain a voice on the job. That's what a union is. That's all it is. It's not me. It's not Tom. It's the workers themselves. It's our members. That's the union. And without them, there is no union. Without you and you can't spell union. It's literally just non, right? And so that's the short nutshell answer to your question.
Cool. Thank you. So, okay, I guess this question is for either of you. So whoever wants to jump in on it, but what kind of jobs can be unionized?
So any work that's done by people where you have more than one person doing that work, there's a way to unionize. There's some specific weird things that are set out by the National Labor Relations Act that make certain groups harder to organize, like security guards are specifically excluded from representation by any union other than one that only represents security guards, which can be frustrating because I have experience with security, I understand the industry, and I can't represent security guards, right? But with the exception of people that have access to proprietary information, like the recipe for Coca-Cola, right? Almost anybody can join a union, form a union and join it. And the Teamsters Union, because we are a general union, we take everybody. If you look around, it's been a very long time since anybody watching this podcast saw a horse team driver moving products across this country. And do you know why? Because there are no more horse team drivers moving products across this country, right? But we're still Teamsters, right? We moved into trucking. We have always been a union that innovates and expands and takes on new groups. And that's actually our strength at this point is we represent so many different crafts and we have experience in so many different crafts that when we actually have to flex our strength, if you piss me off, you will not get packages from UPS. You will not get garbage service. You will not get anything for your business. I will shut you down, right? And just being able to say that means we don't have to. It's amazing, right? Because Teamsters do everything. Every role that you depend on as a business is supplied by the Teamsters. And that's what makes us strong. So I got off there. Who can join a union? Well, like I said, if there's two people doing the same work, they can be in a union.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I just want to jump to a question from the comments, which is Kylan Patterson says that he's worked in the financial industry for over 15 years, and the finance lobby is so strong, they've shut down any and all attempts to unionize. Is there a way for the banking industry to finally not be an at-will employer?
So, Kylan, this is exciting, but I'm currently working to organize a group that's in a very related industry, and I'm not going to out that group, but there is no industry that's off limits, right? The question is, can you know your coworkers? Can you know the people that are doing the work with you? Because nobody asks the employer, hey, can we have a union? I'm not going to go in there and do that, right? Guess what? Your employer doesn't get the choice. Now, your employer's going to spend a lot of money convincing you otherwise, right? They're going to spend huge amounts of money and resources trying to prevent you from thinking that you can have a union. They're going to try and get you not to talk to me. They're going to convince you that you'll be fired if you talk to me. But why are they spending all that money? It's because it's going to cost them 10 times as much money to pay y'all what you're worth. And that's the absolute truth. They're going to tell you it's because they're concerned for you. They're going to tell you that, if you have to pay dues, that's money you don't get for your food. We're going to get into this at some point in this podcast. But if you are represented by a collective bargaining agreement, right, and by a union, on average, you make 20% more. That's how it works. You make 20% more if you have a union negotiating for you on average. you can do it. And I would love to help you. And there are people that would love to help you. We're out there. Don't let them convince you that it can't be done.
Cool. All right. So hopefully, I'm sure you and Kylan will talk about that one later. So Tom, this is for you. What what have unions been or like done historically? Like where did they come from? Where did this idea of a union come from? And I know there's a
Well,
lot of aspects of labor that we kind of take for granted these days. And I've heard that a lot of that is from unions, but I'd love to hear more of the details.
well, this is definitely something that I'm going to give you my answer, and then Mark's going to chime in with a bunch of information because he's an absolute nerd about union history.
Awesome.
But I think the most significant origin story for unions is coal country in the United States. People were working in these mines. They were literally digging money out of the ground and living on pennies. And they got together and agreed that that was insane and they should be paid. And they formed their union. They tried to negotiate with the boss. And that was so crazy and so revolutionary an idea that the people digging money out of the ground, right? Money that was put in the ground not by the person that owned that ground, right? That they wanted their piece. That the first air attack on the United States, the first time that our Air Force was used, it was used against striking workers in coal country.
Blair Mountain.
Right. Yep. The Battle of Blair Mountain, right? From the very beginning, it has been subversive and terrifying to business interests and people that are supported by business interests. This idea that the people that generate wealth, the fantastic wealth that has built this nation, would want to get together, that they have killed unionists for it. And it's less of a thing now, but they just try and ruin our lives. But so what have unions done? 40-hour work week sound good? Okay, that was a union thing. Weekends? Yeah, that was kind of a union idea. Sick days, vacations. How about the ever popular baby bonding time? These are all things that union activism brought and became so popular that they had to be given to everybody. Today, unions are still innovating. If you look at Local 6, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in San Francisco, they came up with this idea of a 35-hour work week. And they did it actually to make sure that they had full employment. The idea was that if you only work 35 hours, then there's 5 hours more available to the next union member. And they negotiated that into their agreement. So unions today are constantly improving the standards of living for their members. And by setting those standards, they're improving the standards of living for everybody else. Mark, I think you could probably answer this better.
No, Tom, I think you did a great job. I mean, all I would say is that, the history of not even just labor unions, right, but workers standing together has existed as long as there have been workers and bosses, right? I don't know what the local was for the Hebrews who were pushing the big blocks that built the pyramids, but as long as there were workers getting, the short end of the stick and bosses, running, laughing all the way to the bank, there's been struggle. And it wasn't until 1935 with the passage of the Wagner Act, more commonly known as the National Labor Relations Act, since unions have been recognized as, legal entities with the right to represent workers, right? Prior to that, and I was kind of going to go into that, or what I was thinking with the previous question, right? Is that, for a long time, unions were seen as, criminal syndicate organizations, right? They had no jurisdiction under the law to represent workers, and it depended upon workers themselves coming together in voluntary participatory organizations to fight for their interests. It wasn't until President FDR and the Democratic Congress in the 1930s passed the NLRA that created a legal framework for workers to be able to organize and represent themselves and not be at the total and complete whim of employers. So yeah, Tom, I think you did a great job at answering that question. I mean, a look at any United States labor history in particular. It will keep you up all night, the stuff you'll read. I mean, it's not just the Battle of Blair Mountain. I mean, the Coal Wars themselves that took place from the mid 1910s to, I believe, the early 20s. The amount of violence and just absolute vigilante terror that was committed against, trade unions, even in our own county. In Sonoma County, you had union organizers who were attempting to get a 35-cent raise, I believe, for apple pickers in Sebastopol. They were tarred and feathered and paraded through the 4th Avenue on Santa Rosa. Look it up. The Apple Strike of 1935. So yeah, I mean, our country has a fraught history with labor, and the reason for that is that unions scare the living heebie-jeebies out of people with money. They want to be able to have all the say, all the power. They want to hold all the cards in their hands, and they don't want to negotiate with us as equals. And that's pretty much it. That's why they hate our guts.
So I have a sort of follow-up question to that, because growing up, I didn't really know what a union was. Like, my mom had raised me to be pro-union, but I didn't know what that meant. And I heard a lot of bad things about unions. And so they get a pretty bad rap. And so a big criticism of unions that you'll hear is that they're socialist or they're anti-capitalist. And so I guess a question there is, like, are unions and capitalism at odds?
Well, unions and unregulated capitalism can be at odds. That's fair. But it's a simple fact that a company that is unionized is more likely to stick around. It's more likely to make better decisions for the company when they have to pay for the benefits of their employees, and they're going to have better employees. I mean, that is true. Look at UPS, right, which is one of the largest union companies in this country, has been around since before trucks. UPS drivers were Teamsters that were team drivers that did things with horses, right? And there have been many, many other companies in the same industry that have risen and fallen, and UPS is still the absolute leader. UPS is absolutely a business, a for-profit entity in a capitalist system, and they are forced to negotiate with representatives for their workers. It's just another contract, one of many that they have, right? And in our capitalist system, the union has a role, right? Unregulated capitalism that includes shooting people that demand more money. Yeah, unions are against that, and will continue to be against that, right? But at the end of the day, all we're doing really is getting together and figuring out what the value of the work being performed is and making sure that the workers get it. And is there a more capitalist notion than negotiating for the best possible rate for what you're selling? Workers are selling their labor, their sweat. That is a capitalist notion. And, we work to improve ourselves. We work to be the best quality workforce out there. That's a capitalist notion too, because we're selling a better product. I think it's important to understand that where the roots of the unions or socialist thing comes from. And that is something that didn't even appear really until World War II, right? And after unions, and specifically the Teamsters, played a gigantic role in the war effort, right? Went and built roads in the Philippines so that the U.S. military could move equipment around. After that happened, the Teamsters were on this gigantic high nationally, and there was a dedicated and sincere effort to damage the reputation of unions by business, and they invested a lot of money on it. And what was the big boogeyman? It was socialism. And so, they want to spread the wealth around, so that means they're socialist. Unions are not socialists. There are socialists in the union movement, for sure. But unions are not a socialist thing, because unions don't rely on government handouts to do their thing, right? Unions are a negotiation between workers and business. Government's not involved and should not be involved until one party's acting in bad faith or breaking the law, right? So, socialism. Government divides stuff up and passes it out to citizens. You might like that, you might not, right? Unionism. Workers get together, negotiate as equals with their employer over the value of the labor they're providing, and that's not a socialist notion. And if you say it, say that it is, then really you're just trying to avoid the truth, which is people deserve to be paid.
Cool. Well said. This question's for both of you, but I want to start with Mark. We've talked about this a little bit, but what are the benefits to unions existing? Like, not just to the people in the unions, but is like, if I'm not in a union, do I still get a benefit from the union existing, or am I getting screwed over because I'm not in one?
I mean, I'm sure that Tom has provided some sources to kind of back up what I'm about to say. But I think all the data and the numbers point to the reality that a workforce with high union density does benefit workers who are in non-union industries or in non-union shops, right? Because then when you're having an employer that's paying, $27 an hour, $27 an hour, for example, you're having non-union companies that are having to compete with that, right? So that's just one example out of many of how unions and union density uplifts the standards of working conditions and wages for all workers, right? When non-union competitors are forced to compete with companies that do provide a living wage, that do provide good benefits, that do provide good job security, that forces them in a race to the top, right? And that's kind of the opposite of what you're seeing now with the decreasing and deflating union density. You're seeing a race to the bottom, right? Who can compete for, who can pay the lowest while delivering the most packages. And with an example to, Amazon delivery driving subcontractors, right? In like those facilities I would organize, you would have a bunch of different little companies that drive those prime vans, and whichever company, paid the less while pushing their workers to deliver the most, got special, got the best routes from Amazon, right? That's a very specific example of the opposite effect. But I would say that unions uplift all workers, not just their members. So, Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, let me. Am I?
You're muted now.
Oh, now I'm muted. Okay, so I want to flesh out some of the things that Mark said there, because there's some real hard numbers that exist. I said earlier that if you're covered by a collective bargaining agreement, you make on average 20% more, right? The numbers exist. It's true. We can acknowledge that. What I didn't say, and what Mark said that we all have the numbers for as well, every time you organize a position, right? So we organize 5 widget manufacturers, right? 5 people doing that work. You raise their wage 20%, but for each one of those positions, you raise 3 other workers' wage 10%. Right? So you improve the lives of 5 people by 20% there as far as wage. You improve the lives of 15 other people, right? Their wage by 10% just by forming a union. It's one of the most effective tools you can use to improve the lives of people in your community is union organizing. And those numbers, they exist, they're real. Those aren't made up. But here's an even better example. You follow the rise of union organizing from the early 1900s, right? And it tracks the growth of the middle class in the United States. And then at one point, you see a decline in unionization in the United States. And, we could talk about why that is, but mostly that's because business has spent a huge amount of money convincing people that unions are bad and socialist, and convincing politicians to get in the way of unionizing efforts. But from that point, when unions started declining, the wealth discrepancy, right, the inequality in our country and in our community skyrocketed. And the two lines track, right? As soon as people stopped being able to negotiate for the value that they were creating, then the people that were owning the businesses, right, were able to take more of that money and leave the workers with less, right? So when you what is the benefit of unions? Well, they prevent inequality, or at least they mitigate it, right? It used to be in this country that it was just understood that if you were CEO of a company and you made 40 times the lowest paid employee of your company, you were dirt, right? And I will still go out there. This is going to hurt some feelings, but guess what? If you own a company and you make 40 times what your lowest paid employee makes, you are filth. You disgust me, right? And guess what? That wasn't a problem when we had close to 50% unionization in this country. Now it's out of control. You know, we're seeing people making tens of thousands what their lowest paid employee makes. Why is that? What is Jeff Bezos doing on a minute to minute that is worth as much money as he's making versus the guy that can't even get a freaking bathroom break because he's killing himself to make sure that people get their sexual lubricant or whatever it is that they ordered, right? Jeff Bezos is not providing more value to that company on a minute by minute basis than the people that are doing the work. But he's, what is he, a trillionaire now? Good job, Jeff.
Something like that. Yeah.
Proud of you.
So there's a question from the comments that I think is interesting here, which is William Cushing, however you say your name. William says the presentation of capitalism I'm familiar with uses money as a measure of value, but money is, I think, better understood as a representation of value rather than value itself. From that standpoint, how can one examine / view / speak about a union as a way of differently placing, as a way of differently placing control of the human capital? I'm having a little trouble parsing this, but
was that interesting or intentionally vague? Like intentionally difficult to understand? William, go away. Ask a better question.
So what I think, from my understanding of what William is saying, basically he's saying that a union, it's pretty similar to what you're saying, where a union is a representation of human capital, of the shared labor that the workforce is doing and bargaining for the value of that human capital. And so I guess he's sort of wondering how to make the messaging what you just said. William, if we're misunderstanding your question, please clarify in the chat. We would love to answer it, but as it is, I'm not sure how to answer that.
It's just not accessible.
Okay. Anyways, so I wanted to shift a little bit. Oh, actually, I want to go back just a second. And there's a terminology thing here, which is like people talk about, a lot of different, like all these different acronyms, right? There's like the IBW and, other letters strung together. There's the Teamsters, right? There's all these different unions. What are the differences between the various unions and what kind of dynamic does that create? Like, how do they interact with each other?
Do you want to go, Mark?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like, you got some unions like from back in the day, like the IWW, that attempted to be industrial unions that represented as many different workers as possible. But what ended up happening is that you have a bunch of different unions that represent workers in different industries and different jurisdictions. And they have all sorts of wacky acronyms. And if you're a normal person, unlike me, you probably might not know all of them. Right, like you have, let's go through some of the big unions, right? Like you have the IBT, right? What does that stand for? International Brotherhood of Teamsters. What's a Teamster? It's what Tom was talking about earlier. It's a horse driver. We don't have those anymore. Now most of our members drive trucks, but we're not just truck drivers. Our general president, James B. Hoffa, has a saying, the Teamsters represent workers from A to Z. We represent airline attendants all the way to zookeepers. We are what the IWW kind of attempted to be back in the day, really an industrial union that represents all different kinds of workers, whether you are truck drivers, whether you are airline staff, whether you are warehousemen, whether you are taxi drivers, right? We represent everybody, right? But there's unions that represent specific lines of work, right? Like you have, for example, Unite Here, which stands for the Union of Needle Trade Industries, Textile Employees, Hotel and Restaurant Employees International Union. They represent workers that are mainly in restaurants and hotels. However, Unite Here does also represent a lot of workers in textile. Another union, SEIU, right? The Service Employees International Union. You would think by the title of it that they would represent workers in the service sector, like fast food. That's not really the case. They represent a lot of public sector workers, a lot of healthcare workers, social workers, like home care workers that help elderly citizens and people. Another union, IBEW, right? That one's more explicit. International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. They represent linemen and journeymen and people that work on the power lines. PG&E workers. They're represented by IBEW. One more. What can I think of? Let me think. You got Tom. Name of the union off for me. Turn your mute off.
You're muted.
You got sprinkler fitters. That's a really specific craft union. And there's a difference between the more traditional industrial unions and the more craft kind of almost like association unions that represent very specific lines of work, like firefighters, police officers, electrical workers, operating engineers, carpenters, and then you have unions like us that represent everybody, represent all different kinds of workers. So hopefully that was somewhat of a good answer. Go ahead.
Well, no, it just sounds like it comes back to the idea of like, if you're working, if you have two people who are doing a job, there can be a union there. Something you mentioned police unions, and I wanted to touch on that because, with the recent Black Lives Matter protests, there's been a lot of conversation about police unions and sort of their role. And are police unions different from other labor unions? And if so, how?
All right. So this is one of those questions that we just have to all behave like adults when we answer it, because there's a lot of emotional baggage that goes with any discussion of policing and police unions right now. And that's fair because, there's been a lot of horrible things done in this country and a lot of people have been hurt. And police unions are being seen as villainous because often they represent villains, right? That's the case. When you are a union representative, you like to represent the best workforce in your industry, but you represent everybody that is part of your bargaining unit. And you have what's called a duty to fair representation, right? You don't get to choose not to do your job. If someone is a member of your union and they pay dues, then you represent them. And you represent them to the best of your ability. That's your job, and it's what you have to do. And in that sense, the police unions are very similar to all the other unions. The real issue, and, surprise, surprise, people are dodging responsibility here, is there's been a lot of filleting of law enforcement over the years by politicians. And police have more rights than regular citizens. And that's just the law. And the police unions use those extra rights that police have to represent them. That's just how it is. And not using those rights would be denial of fair representation. It's not on the police union necessarily to suck at their job. It's on the politicians that make the laws to legislate away the loopholes that protect law enforcement officers. If I were a business representative for a police union and I could get my officers off, I would have to do it. I wouldn't have a choice. We as a community, as Americans, need to not look at this as a union problem and look at it as, what the hell is the liability, what's it called? It's slipping my mind right now, but the
qualified immunity.
Yeah, qualified immunity, right? What is that? That's crazy.
You explain real quick what qualified immunity is for people who might not know?
It's the idea that law enforcement officers, as long as they thought they were doing the right thing, can't be held liable for doing the wrong thing, right? So, and it's about feels, and it's from that concept, we've gotten to the point where a highly trained person can panic and shoot someone, but a person who has no training whatsoever must not panic when a highly trained person puts a gun in their face. Because if they panic, that could be justification for the highly trained person to panic and shoot them. That's crazy. We're paying police officers to do a job, and now we're getting into a political thing, right? You asked about the you asked about what the difference is between police unions and regular unions. Police unions just have more tools to represent their members. You know, when one of my members gets drunk and kills someone in a truck, their blood gets tested and they go to prison and they lose their job, right? They don't have qualified immunity. There shouldn't be a class of people that have qualified immunity, but since they do, their union has to represent them. They don't have a choice. That's the law. You represent horrible people sometimes.
Got it.
And this is worth pointing out. Unions are democracy in the workplace. Union officials are elected, right? So in a sense, the police unions reflect the constituency that elected them, right?
So police.
So, police.
Got it.
Have better police officers that elect people with more integrity, I guess, is what I would say, because once they're there, they have to do their job.
Got it. Okay.
So thank you, everybody, for Adult Minute. Like I said, there's feelings involved there. No one likes it, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and I kind of want to bounce off that because, obviously, like Tom had mentioned, in this country and in the way that we do policing, right? We have a serious issue with systemic white supremacy and racial bias. That's undeniable, right? The issue here and the targeting of and where I kind of have a problem is seeing people on the left and the Democratic Party kind of adopt anti-union, kind of right-wing union busting rhetoric when it comes to police unions in particular. And that isn't to say that there aren't problems caused by police unions, right? They have become, in the United States context, pretty reactionary organizations, right? But what it's important to remember is that the problems with policing are systemic. They come from the top. Police unions don't run a hiring hall or an apprenticeship program. Management is who hires cops, trains the cops, and militarizes cops. Management creates and staffs the special crowd and control units, right? So at this point, I don't think police unions would do better than management at policing themselves. But management is who lets the problems get glossed over. It's management that encourages those cultures, those reactionary and right-wing cultures within the unions that are so pervasive. And so I don't, like Tom had said, I don't think any union is better or worse than their own members. Fix the system of policing. Fix police management, hiring and training of police. And I believe that the police unions hopefully will self-correct. And I think it's notable to look at police unions in other countries, right? They're not social justice focused unions, perhaps like SEIU or Unite Here, but they're certainly not as reactionary as they are in the United States. And so I think that has more to do with the culture that is perpetuated by management, right? The system of policing. What we see in the police unions is not a result of law enforcement having representation, right? It's the result of the system of management, right? And so that would kind of be that's just my opinion. I'm just as a trade unionist, I'm just disturbed by any kind of union busting rhetoric, right? Regardless of the circumstances. I think we need to be careful of that.
Yeah, I can see how that would set a precedent that could be carried on into other industries.
If you put bullies in charge of hiring people to work with themselves, they're going to hire bullies. And then those bullies are going to elect their union reps. That's, the first thing you should probably do is quit using lie detector tests to select for sociopaths.
Yeah. Or anyways, we could get far afield here. We got a SEIU representing in the chat. Cool.
10-1.
Yep. 10-1.
Hey.
So, okay, so I want to switch over a little bit to a more like this. So this is like the how-to section, right? And this is around, you know, if you're working at a job and you feel like you're being exploited and you want to unionize your workplace, you want to join a union, what do you do, right? Where do you even start? And also, what protections are there for you so that you don't get fired for like sneezing the word union at your job?
Well, the number one protection that anybody interested in forming a union in their own workplace has is common sense, right? We'll start with that. Just out the gate, if you walk up to your boss and you're like, and you know what? We're going to form a union. There's good luck. That's not going to work, right? Nobody asks their boss if they can have a union, and nobody tells their boss they're going to do it until it's time, right? The first thing you got to do is talk to your coworkers and kind of understand that you have a community of interest, right? And from there, probably the best, smartest thing you can do in today's world is contact a local union in the area and ask for help. A lot of times, the next best step, right, is to just sit down away from work, a place your boss doesn't go, and just have an honest conversation about your needs, your expectations, and what can be accomplished. Because we're not in the industry of bullshitting people. You know, we're not in the industry of lying to people, and we're not in the industry of getting people fired. Mark is a professional at this, so I should probably just take a back seat here and just scream when I have something to say.
Yeah. Well, Mark, so I guess specifically one of my first questions, like, if you were talking to me about it, you know, or actually, no, let's go back. So I'm a worker. I hate my job. I want my job to treat me better. How do I even contact you? And then if I do, what do you tell me?
Well, hopefully you have access to the internet. You can go on Facebook and see that I work for the Teamsters, and then hopefully slide in my DMs. And the first thing I would tell you to do, because you know we at the union, we get calls like this all the time. Hey, you know, I'm having problems at work. Hey, I hate my boss. Hey, this, hey that, right? But the thing is, a lot of times it's just them, right? And so one of the things I would tell you is, if you reached out to me, is say, you know, have a couple conversations with your fellow coworkers, but the coworkers that you trust, right, that don't got the gift of gab and are going to run to management and say that you were complaining. I wouldn't even say in the first several conversations that you have, you would talk about a union. But what I would do is tell you to, you know, start talking to your coworkers and bring up those problems that you're experiencing. Ask them about those issues and see if they're experiencing the same thing, because I bet they probably are. And if they are, you know, continue that conversation. Obviously, keep it on the down low, but see if other people in your workplace are experiencing the same issues. And if they are, then it's likely that you won't be alone in any struggle to win a voice at work. And so the very first step, I would say, just seriously, the foundation of any organizing, but union organizing in particular, is one-on-one conversations, talking to each other, finding those issues that we all share in commonality, right? Because those are the issues that will bring people together, right? If we're all experiencing the same problems, we're more likely to come together to try and fight it, right? So that would be the very, very first step. And I can go into detail, you know, what I would do as an organizer on the outside to try and organize a workplace. But any kind of organizing is going to require the workers themselves to spearhead it. It's not up to me. It's up to whether you and your coworkers would want that.
So let's kind of get into the nuts and bolts of it, since the question is how do we organize? So, you know, first we establish that we have a community of interest, right? There are things going on in this workplace that are affecting us, and, you know, this is what we're upset about. The majority of the time, now, unions are really good at the wage piece, but the majority of the time, the thing that people are most concerned about is job security, right? And that's definitely something that is a subject of bargaining. And, you know, having a fair and understood discipline practice with progressive discipline is something that we do. But that's actually the thing that I find people are most responsive to, is, this is an at-will state, and we could be terminated, any one of us at any time, just because the boss doesn't like our face anymore. In fact, do you remember Jerry? Yeah, we all remember Jerry. Jerry, had, microwave fish, and there is no Jerry, right? That's BS. That's kind of the thing that people are most motivated by. The nuts and bolts of the process are community of interest. Let's get a meeting off-site. Let's talk to people, right? Let's figure out what it is the group wants. I don't want to know what I want, right? It's not about my ego. If I'm, a good business agent and I'm a good negotiator, I'm in it for the workers, right? I'm going to listen to the workers. They're going to tell us, what they want. Let's figure that out. Then let's talk to some more people. Let's get some more people involved. Eventually what we're going to have is we're going to have a organizing committee, the group of people that are most committed to this organizing effort, right? And we're going to put together a strategic plan to contact everybody that works there that we trust. There's a couple of people that we will not contract. We put them on the mushroom program, right? Keep them in the dark, feed them shit. We don't need them, right? But everybody else, the people that work for a living and don't live in their boss's ass, is going to be, involved in this process, right? Eventually, what's going to happen is the cards are going to come out. It's a 3x5 card, looks like a poster card. This card is absolutely confidential. My personal rule when I'm organizing, it never goes to the job site, ever, right? It's not going to get dropped on the ground where the boss can spot it, right? The goal is to get as many people in the bargaining unit, which is a defined group with community of interest, to sign these interest cards. 30% of the cards is enough to schedule an election. If you send in 30% of the cards to the National Labor Relations Board, you're an idiot, right? I don't send in cards till I have at least 80%. I need to know, because here's what's going to happen. As soon as I file for an election, right, the National Labor Relations Board is going to call the company, say, send us a list of your workers in this defined group. The company's going to go, oh, well, there's only one reason the National Labor Relations Board called us. Let's dial up a crazy New York attorney to come in here and terrify everybody in captive audience meetings for the rest of forever, right? But they're going to send in that list of the employees, and NLRB looks at it. If they verify that there's at least 30% interest, they schedule an election. Now we're into the real time, right? This is it. You're going to be tormented. Your boss is going to drag you in for captive audience meetings. They're going to bring a shopping cart full of groceries, and they're going to tell you this is all the food that you could have bought if you weren't paying union dues. Right? Right? And you're going to look at that shopping cart and be like, that's a lot of groceries. Right? Real talk, if you elect to have a union and you give me an opportunity to negotiate for you, you're not paying dues. Right? I negotiate with the company. I do the absolute best I can. If I bring you a contract that doesn't improve your life by more than the dues you're going to pay, then you should tell me to go away because I did not do my job, and you will never pay dues. There is no downside to union organizing, because if it doesn't improve your life, you tell me to take a hike, and I will, because I didn't do my job, and I will be embarrassed, right? That's how that goes. So if I can't bring you a wage increase and improvement in your benefits that makes it worth it, right? In a real sense, right? If I can't show you the math, then you should tell me to go away, right? Now, there's other ways to accomplish this organizing, right? We could do the union cards. We can ask the company for card check, right? This is kind of the holy grail of organizing. The company agrees, if you can get better than 50% of my employees to sign this card, we'll have a third party compare the cards to our employee list, and we'll just recognize the union. Right? That's a good faith company that's doing business in a responsible and respectful manner that's, cares about their employees. Another option, right? If you don't want to deal with the just abuse that you're going to get from the New York attorneys, we can strike for recognition, right? You convince me that if we had an election, we would win, right? I will give the company a letter. I will walk right in, because it's never your job. Right? It's always mine. And I will find your boss, and I will give him a letter. And the letter will say, Teamsters Local 665 is going to strike for recognition in 24 hours if you do not recognize our right to represent your workers in a negotiation. And the company's going to be like, get out of here. And that's fine, right? Because the next day, when I pull up a 53-foot long truck across the frontage of the company and they can't do business because there's a freaking street party and all of our friends from all the other labor unions in the area are out there in clown costumes with PAs throwing fireballs and having a good time, and no business is done, we will get recognition, right? So that's another option. It's a little bit more adversarial. It's a lot of fun, right? And so those are the three paths to recognition, right? We can do card check, we can have an election that's administered by the NLRB, or we can strike for recognition. Mark, did I miss anything?
You got to make sure to follow the model, bro. You got to make sure that the organizing committee got every shift in demographic, man. No, you did.
That's your job.
I'm too much of a nerd, man. Tom, I could have said it myself, Tom. Great job. What I would say, obviously, if we were going to get into the nuts and bolts of it, right, before we would organize a committee, we would obviously want a list. Once we organize that committee, we would want to make sure it's representative of every single demographic and shift.
A list meaning a list of the employees?
Yes.
Okay.
That's one of the first things we try and do, is get a hold of a list of employees. But Tom is absolutely on the dot. We got to make sure that we have an organizing committee. A lot of organizers get it twisted. They think it's just about dropping cards on the company site, as many cards as you can get, and you file. No, that's not it. You've got to have an organizing committee that's made up of leaders, right? And I say leaders because some of the people that we look for to be a part of that committee are the workers, not the workers that have the loudest mouth or that brag the most, but we look for worksite leaders, people that are respected, that other coworkers go to when they have problems or questions. And the reason that I try to ID leaders is because those people usually have a better capability than we do to convince their employees to join the cause, to push them to action, right? And so we try to make sure that the committee is made up of the worksite leaders and activists, people that are supportive of the union, but don't necessarily have a following. And the committee, if you really want to get in the nitty gritty of it, the committee should consist of, like, I believe it's either 10 or 30% of a work unit. Should be in the committee. You should be aiming for that number. But like Tom had said, he had pretty much condensed my entire spiel into about 3 minutes. And so, yeah, that's good job, brother.
So clarify.
There's something, part of the question that was asked and not answered was, what protections do workers have?
Yeah.
And workers do have some protections, right? It is illegal to terminate someone because they're doing a union organizing campaign. Now, this is the real world, right? And there's a couple things. If the employer can credibly say they were unaware of a union organizing campaign, then they can still do whatever the hell they want, right? So at some point, sometimes strategically, we might send the company a letter, be like, hey, guess what? We're organizing your shop. If you take any, action to surveil your employees or to, discourage them, then you will be, we'll be filing claims with the NLRB. Under Trump, the NLRB has been almost entirely toothless, right? So I'm hoping things get better under the Biden administration, but the best you could hope for from the NLRB when they do something really shitty is a letter be posted in the break room that says, we're sorry we did it and we won't do it again. It's very, very rare that you would get something stronger than that, especially because I will almost never actually see bad behavior against the employees, right? And so the employees will have to be the ones to swear out affidavits. And of course, we would connect them with labor attorneys and do all that. But at the end of the day, it is perilous. I'm not going to BS anybody. It is perilous. It's not a guaranteed you're going to make it out of this unscathed. I will say that if you contact me and I'm working to organize your group and you suffer a loss, like you get unemployed, I will kill to find you a better job than the one you lost. And, that's what I will say, is that there's no downside to trying to organize with me because you'll just end up in a better job. But there'll be some period of anxiety for some people because some people will get terminated, and that is a risk, even though it's illegal, because people break the law. Surprise.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I just wanted to bounce off that. I mean, Brother Tom is totally right. It's because of that very important law called the National Labor Relations Act, or the Wagner Act, that was passed by President FDR in 1935, that all employees, right, unless very specific, groups like Tom had mentioned, like security guards, right? They have the right to partake in what we call protected concerted activity, but what you would probably call union organizing. Now, despite that fact, that union organizing, I believe, is a God-given right, but it is a constitutional right. This doesn't mean that bosses don't just break the law and fire people anyways, right? You got to remember that for a large corporation like Amazon, it's probably preferable to get a slap on the wrist with an unfair labor practice charge than, pay their workers a living wage, or God forbid, negotiate with them as equals. So for a lot of bosses, they'll see, they'll break the law. They don't care. They'll see it. They will do anything to keep all the cards in their hands, and to be able to have all the say, and to keep that dictatorial relationship with their employees.
A perfect example, right? Our local just finished organizing a group of sanitary workers in Sonoma County. I'm going to hold back the company's name, but you could Google it. It's in the newspaper. The company went and told the workers, you can go ahead and vote for your union. Go ahead, have fun. We will not negotiate with the union, right? You're wasting your time. You're going to get fired. It's going to be nothing but heartache. Now, that scared a lot of those workers, right? When your boss is like, go ahead, we're not negotiating, things are going to get worse. In fact, if we had to sit down and negotiate, we'll insist that we pay you less, right? That's the sort of crap that companies will say on the advice of their shitty company attorneys, right? We won that election, and one of our business agents was just down there this morning at 4 a.m. talking to workers. He was down there to demand that the company schedule some negotiations with him. And the workers were like, they said they weren't going to negotiate with you. And he was able to hold up his cell phone with an email from the company that said, of course we will negotiate with you. And you know why? Because if they didn't, it'd be a freaking crime. And we would actually be able to do something about that, right? So understand that when you go through this process, you're going to hear a lot. And a lot of it's going to be BS, right? From people that will make a lot more money if you don't join a union than if you do. But it is BS. We can prove it's BS and be excited to do it.
Great.
And I think very quickly, this is where, we should, inform people that, in a union organizing campaign, a little gimmick that I use to remember what your employer can't do. Doesn't mean that they won't do it, but the things that they can't do is that they can't spit on you. And what does that stand for? Spit stands for S, spy on you. Your employer can't spy on you for when you're trying to organize a union. That's illegal. They can't promise you things. They can't promise to, give you special favors, give you higher wages if you vote down the union, give you special benefits, throw you a party or whatever if you vote down the union. That's illegal. They can't intimidate you or interrogate you for partaking in protected concerted activity. That is illegal. And T, a lot of people assume it's terminate. They can't do that too, but it's actually threat. They cannot threaten you for trying to organize a union. And that includes a whole host of things, including, shutting down the factory. They will often say, oh, if you form a union, what they usually say is bring in a union, because they try to third party us. But if you try to form a union, we'll shut the factory down. We just simply can't afford it. To what I say is, oh, well, why shouldn't you, the workers, have the ability to have them prove it and look at their financial documents and have them prove to you that they can't afford what you're asking for, right? And so they can't spit on you. That's a little acronym I used.
Great. That's incredibly useful. Okay, so kind of my understanding, my summary, and let me know if I got this wrong. Oh, actually, real quick, note to the people who have asked questions, we're coming close to wrapping up the pre-prepared questions, and we'll be getting to the chat questions real soon, okay? So please stick around. So for Mark and Tom, my understanding is that the steps are basically talk to your coworkers, find like-minded people, contact a union, start talking with them without letting the boss know, set up organizing committee, which is a group of your coworkers who you trust to sort of be in charge with this. Then once you guys have enough people, you're going to sign these cards, and that's when the union is going to file with the National Labor Relations Board for an election. And then there's an election that takes place. And from my understanding, it's 50% of the people who show up to the election plus one is required to bring in a union. Is that correct?
Required to form a union. You're
Required
not
to form a union. Sorry. And then the union comes in, negotiates a contract after talking to everyone, and negotiates contract with the boss. Then goes back to the people who are trying to form a union and says, "Is this contract to your satisfaction?" And then they vote on it. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Great. Okay. So, we have a lot of questions around like recent changes in the law and changes with the administration, like the federal administration. But before we get into that, one question that I had was like, so as of 2014, which is the year with the most recent data, there was 2.6 million undocumented immigrants in California, and many of those are undocumented workers. That number has most likely only grown since then, and often those are the most exploited workers. So if you're undocumented, can you form a union? And how does a worker's documentation status interact with their ability to form a union? And does a union have a way of handling these?
All right. So this is one of those questions we have to break down into two categories: legalities and practicalities. Right? Legally, the union represents workers. Right? There's nothing on any form that I have in my office that asks for someone's, residency status. It's not important to me, right? And historically, normal order was if there was a union organizing campaign that the National Labor Relations Board was made aware of, they would contact INS, right? And they would tell them, leave us alone, leave these workers alone, right? And that was because companies figured out a long time ago that a great way to intimidate people was to have their families deported, right? The Trump administration has definitely upended that historical practice, right? So for the last 4 years, things have been much worse for immigrants, I'm sure, and undocumented workers, and I'm sure no one's surprised by that. There is a sincere hope that with the incoming Biden administration, we get back to normal order. In California, it is a law that if an employer uses an employee's immigration status to discourage a union organizing effort, that employer's business license can be suspended for 30 days. That's pretty freaking cool. Now, practicalities, right? It's really hard in this country to legally employ undocumented workers, right? So we as a union could represent everybody at a job site, but it can be very hard to protect people from, intimidation or retribution based on their immigration status. If you already have people that are employed at a business when you organize, right? So legally employed, right? Whether or not they have a legal right to work, but the paperwork's been done, right? For whatever way they were able to get a taxpayer ID number or use someone else's taxpayer ID number, and they got hired, right? And they're employees, they should be seen as safe, right? If they're not actually employees, in the sense that there's no paper trail, it is a lot harder to represent them. And I don't know what the actual answer to that is. And it's a question that I ask a lot. I work with a lot of local nonprofits. I work with immigration attorneys. I ask that question all the time, and no one's ever been able to come to me with a satisfactory answer. And that's unfortunate because the union's position is we represent workers. But if they're not employed, and this is going to come into some of the questions earlier about independent contractors, we don't really have a mechanism for representing them. So a lot of employers employ people that are undocumented and they're on paper, and that's good. We can do that. I don't know how to do it for undocumented workers that are, not officially employed. And that's something that keeps me up at night, and that's really frustrating. And I'm really excited for someone to come up with a solution to it, but it's not me today.
Cool. Thank you for the somber but thorough answer. Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, Tom had hit everything that I was probably going to go over. There's nothing that I've ever heard of that says that, undocumented workers are unable to, join a union.
Mhm.
It's just that with the last administration, you have a complete, you have a detachment from historical practice, and kind of that, naked terror of, terrorizing immigrants, right? So I would, Tom hit on pretty much everything that I was probably going to say. So, there's nothing stopping undocumented workers from, joining existing unions or, coming together and forming their own, organizations to fight for their interests. I mean, look at the history of the United Farm Workers. I mean, a lot of them weren't, undocumented, but they do a lot of the same work working in the fields. So like, goes back to what Tom had said, as long as there's two people working, they can come together and fight for their interests, just odds
And
against.
there's other resources. There's other resources. There's nonprofits in the community that those workers that are unrepresented can, find organization through. Jobs with Justice
Absolutely.
is an absolutely amazing organization in our community that's had a lot of impact in the undocumented worker community.
Mhm.
The Great and Day Labor Center is a place that undocumented workers can go to be dispatched to work with a contract between the Great and Day Labor Center and the employer that sets a standard for those workers. While they may not be, technically employees, there are resources out there.
Mhm.
The traditional trade union it's a hard model to force on people that are not actually employees.
For sure.
And really, what it begs for is an organization that goes back to the 30s, back to the 20s,
Mhm.
Exactly the way they did it in the coal mines when there was no legal, recognition of unions. Organize, and guess what? If the migrant farm worker community stops working on farms, then they will get what they need, because
Yeah.
Americans are not going to pay $30 for a head of lettuce.
Yeah.
It's just
I
how it is.
mean, we are back in the 20s again, so.
It's the exact same power that that we utilized in this country before.
Okay, so yeah, we have a couple more questions from the chat around like resources that I want to get into, but last one of my questions is, you know, we are in a global pandemic at the moment, and a lot of people are unemployed because of that, and a lot of businesses are suffering. And, essential workers are either having to put their lives on the line or lose their livelihood. And I guess a question that I have, and that it's probably on a lot of people's minds when we talk about unions and talk about working and, making employees or employers pay more, is like, how is your union sort of advocating for your members during a pandemic when a lot of people are losing their jobs?
It's a tremendous question and exciting because there's an answer to it.
Cool.
So there's a lot of answers to it. First, anytime there's a change in the working conditions, that's something that the union can demand a bargain over, right? So we started by stepping in and demanding that companies prove to us their plan for keeping their workers safe, right? And you'll find that the majority of my workers that are frontline workers are working in safer conditions than unrepresented workers, right? Because we insisted on CDC plus, right? The next thing we did was, where workers had to be laid off, we immediately went in and negotiated with companies to extend their medical benefits. And we were successful in a lot of cases. Look, everybody knows that school bus drivers are impossible to find, right? So when you magically lay off all of your school bus drivers, the worst thing you can have as a company is them finding other jobs, right? So we went in and we incentivized retention, right? That was the thing to the company, right? By negotiating with them to pay, their drivers a stipend or for medical insurance. A lot of those contracts, the school bus companies had already been paid by the school district for a service that was no longer provided. They had the money, right? And once I understood, that quite frankly, I was going to represent my members and I would find them other work, and you would not have school bus drivers next year when school opened if you didn't find a way to, retain them. We got some things done there. Another thing that we did was, there was the extra money that was passed federally to, take care of people when they were on unemployment. Well, we used that and went into companies that had to reduce their work staffs and first put it out to a volunteer layoff, right? So people that were feeling unsafe. I'm 65 years old. I'm in one of the defined populations. We're going to lay off 20 people. Does anybody want to take a layoff? So instead of, letting the company just be like, we're going to, lay off these people here and they don't get a choice. So that's one of the things that we were able to do, was we were able to create choice and option for our members. In San Francisco, where we represent parking attendants, and we have set the highest wage standard anywhere in the nation for parking attendants, we were able to maintain their medical insurance through the medical trust that was in their contract for several months. In fact, I don't deal with parking directly myself, but I think that no lapse of insurance occurred for our parking attendants. We are negotiating over the impacts at Golden Gate Bridge for our members. During this pandemic, our bus servicers, or the people that clean buses, that bargaining unit's grown by 25%. This pandemic's created opportunities. Buses need to be absolutely sanitized now. So before it was sweep them and fuel them and, do a deep clean on the carpet or on the seats once a month. Now the buses are sanitized top to bottom, every day, multiple times a day. So, we've had a role, and we've made sure that our members received the best possible deal in this pandemic. I will say that construction has gone absolutely, unabated during this pandemic, and I represent a lot of construction truck drivers. So really my concern was, are they safe at work? And making sure that they were safe at work. But we've been busy. We've actually, in construction truck driving, we negotiated the highest raise we've ever negotiated for construction truck driving this year during the pandemic. Because that was still work that needed. We weren't going to listen to this idea that, we're in a global pandemic. No, you know what? You're making money. We did our job. Our job didn't change.
So it sounds like the union has basically been very mindful. It's continuing to look out for its members during the pandemic, and I think that's something that a lot of people have concern about right now. I guess I appreciate everyone who's been sticking by us in the chat. I know we've gone pretty long here. I want to get into the Q&A. The last thing before I do that, and real quick, I just want to, ask both of you, how can people get involved? Do they contact you personally? Do they contact their local union? How do they get involved?
My phone number is on our website for Teamsters Local 665. Mark can be found on Facebook. If you're in a craft that has a specific union to it, because everybody should have access to trade unionism, then that craft will have a website, and you should contact them, and don't take no for an answer. There are some unions that don't do as good a job of organizing and being aggressive about that as the Teamsters. Don't take no for an answer. And if you're having trouble, find me anyway. Even if I'm not the guy that should be representing your group, I'm going to do what I can to take care of your group. I'll make the connection and get you where you need to be, because this is, we're part of a labor community, and we're all rowing in the same direction.
Cool. So in that case, we'll be posting a link to y'all's website in the chat for people to check that out. Mark, I know you just put your phone number in the private chat. I don't know if you want us posting that publicly. But if you want to comment on this video once it's done recording, people can find you on Facebook and reach out to you that way. So great. Okay, we're gonna get into some of the questions that were asked. We'll try to get everyone, but it's 8:54, and I know everyone's, some of us have work in the morning, some of us still have work tonight. So let's see what we can start with. Okay, well, actually, we talked about this a little bit. We were talking about how awful Trump's labor board has been. Kylan wanted to know, what can the incoming Biden-Harris administration do to strengthen collective bargaining? And an addendum to that I want to put on there is Ian asked, well, Ian was basically saying that, Biden has made a lot of promises, but the people he's appointed into positions don't seem to speak to keeping those promises. So, are there any efforts from the national or from the international unions from the national union to pressure Biden's transition team to actually live up to a pro-union agenda? So,
I mean, that's going to be incumbent upon organized labor to make that fight. Because what we don't want to do is repeat what happened in 2008, when we invested a ton of resources and manpower into electing Barack Obama, and they controlled both houses of Congress and I don't want to say the judiciary, but the executive branch as well.
Yeah.
And they had the opportunity to pass some of the most sweeping pro-worker legislation in a century, and they didn't. Right? They had the Employee Free Choice Act, and they didn't pass it. Right? And shame on us for not being there and pushing them. Right? Because we know that the more middle of the road centrist types were definitely there. They were showing up. Right? Where were we? Right? And so that's where we need to be at this fight. It's incumbent upon us, organized labor, ourselves, to show up and be that counterbalance to, the corporate wing of the Democratic Party. What could Biden do to reverse this trend of declining unionization in this country? He could do a lot, even without Congress. He could stack the labor board once some of the Republicans on the labor board, they term out. He could replace them with more labor-friendly people. And, I'm going to be honest, right? Like, the Democrats aren't necessarily pro-labor. They're usually neutral, whereas the Republicans are almost always solidly pro-billionaire, pro-corporate. With at least the Democrats, we'll get someone that'll listen to us without shoving us face first into the oven. So what if we are fortunate enough to take back the Senate in June, with the 2 runoff races in Georgia? One of the best things Joe Biden could do first is pass the PRO Act. PRO stands for Protect the Right to Organize. This would be one of the most pro-worker bills that has been presented to Congress since the passage of the NLRA. And it's even better than the Employee Free Choice Act that was romanticized about 10 years ago when Obama was brought into office. The PRO Act, amongst many other things, would get rid of right to work for less laws. They call them right to work, but we call them right to work for less. The reason is because in states that have these laws, workers are paid significantly less than workers who are in states that do not have those laws. And there's a lot of confusion around what right to work is. Some people say, oh, if you live in a right to work state, you can be fired for any reason. Well, that's not because of right to work. That's because of at-will employment. And most states have that. Right to work laws are laws that are just designed specifically to destroy labor unions by bankrupting them. It allows workers who are represented by a union to not pay any of their fair share, right, for that representation, despite getting paid more, receiving better benefits, better job security. In a state that has right to work for less, they don't have to pay into that. And so I saw one of the questions in the comments was, Mark, how can in a Republican state can we counter right to work? Well, the best thing you can do is not only organize a union, but join your union. Start paying dues. Make sure that they have the funds that are necessary to fight the bosses. So that's my answer to that question. Another thing that the Biden administration could do to help organize labor is blow a hole in this disastrous nightmare of a proposition that was passed in California, Proposition 22. And one of the ways that they could do that is by blowing a fat hole in the bill, because what you got to remember is that federal law overrules state law. And Prop 22, amongst all the horrible things in it, there's a secret little clause that was written into it that makes it impossible for any of us to ever change even a comma or a word in it, because it requires a 7/8 majority of both houses of the legislature to make any change to Prop 22.
And from my
That was
understanding, even with that, you can only make changes in the interest of Prop 22, right?
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Even with that, even if you're able to get that, you can only change it in a way that expands it. And for those who don't know, Prop 22 was the ballot prop that was bankrolled by Uber and Lyft with $200 million that essentially creates a permanent subclass of worker and outlaws the right to unionize, the right to organize a union for any worker that's dispatched off an app. The bill doesn't even say Uber, Lyft, or DoorDash. It does say TNC, whatchamacallit. It's a transportation network company. So that means any company that dispatches workers off an app, they're not independent contractors in the traditional sense. They're a completely new classification as defined by Prop 22. They're an employee without the right to unionize. So one of the best things Biden could do, or his administration could do, is pass the PRO Act and blow a fat hole in Prop 22. And finally, this leads me to one of the questions you had. Well, if Biden says in his platform that he's anti-Prop 22, Biden says in his platform that he's pro-union, then why is he appointing all these people that are that are pro-Prop 22, like Tony West, general counsel, legal counsel for Uber, that he's now being, romanticized as possibly attorney general? This is why people like Tom and I and our members need to get out there and raise effing hell and say, F no, we cannot have this guy or any other Uber executive in a Biden administration. If you are, you don't call yourself a union man, okay? So that's what I would say. It's up to organized labor to show up and raise hell.
So, related to that, there was a question in the chat that was asking if there's a union option for freelancers in an accepted industry like programming or graphic design. So, can freelancers form a union? Is there a way for that to work?
The freelancers can form an association, but if you're not an employee, then you're not entitled to union representation. Mm-hmm. So, and this is a thing that, again, a topic that weighs on me pretty heavily, because software engineers in particular think they're better paid than they are, right? And work in very exploitive conditions, right? And really looking at it, I think probably, at least in California, the best path for them would be to sue the company and say, I've been an employee all along. Because if you're doing work, that fits the AB5 test, then it's on the employer to prove that you're not an employee. And if you're being told what to do, when to do it, and the manner in which to do it, you're an employee. So I think really the path that those people should take, because software engineers do work in pretty horrible conditions, and working conditions are something that we negotiate. They should be looking to be recognized as employees. Contact a labor attorney and get to work on that. I'll help you if I can. I'll at least make the introductions. And then once you're recognized as a employee, then we can form a union. Look at the Dynamex decision that, AB5 was built off of. It wouldn't be a unique scenario for independent contractors to be like, hey, wait a minute, we are employees and we deserve the rights of employees. And that might be the first place to go.
Great. So related to that, actually, one of our viewers, Carm, is becoming an attorney, and she wants to become involved in the labor movement when she gets her law license, and she says she's worked on lawsuits against police. She's very against qualified immunity. She's interested to know where a lawyer might be most helpful to empower the labor movement. What are some organizations? How does one even get started there?
So I can jump on this. First, congratulations and big on you. I'm really proud of you for wanting to do something. I think we should acknowledge that if you want to be a labor attorney, you will not be a rich person. You know, and so you're doing something because it's right, and that's tremendous. I appreciate it. There are a lot of law firms that specifically focus on labor clients. You know, our local uses Beeson Taylor Bodine. My favorite attorney is retiring. You know, and you know, there's openings in that space there. I am aware of at least one attorney that, you know, focuses on labor stuff from the non-union perspective, that looks for, you know, people that have been, you know, have had their labor rights violated, you know, on a state law sort of way. So there are avenues there. It's righteous work, and it doesn't get paid as much as it, you know, as, you know, taking the 30 pounds of silver or 30 pieces of silver does, you know, for the corporations. So thank you for being willing to do that. You know, you can just Google, you know, law practices that, you know, represent labor. They're out there.
And then also, Carm, send me a message after the show, and I can potentially put you in contact with Tom to get the name of that law firm that he was talking about, where there will be openings. So let's talk about that later.
So I can't promise that I can't promise they're hiring, but I'm aware that there's retirement.
Yeah, absolutely. So Alex had a question, which is one that I've been really interested in, and I know you and I have talked about a little bit off the air, but, you know, do you think that the rise of artificial intelligence and automation is going to hurt the ability of unions to collectively bargain in the future?
That's really broad. Super broad, right? And it assumes a couple things, and some of them I think we can stipulate, and some of them I don't think we're ready to yet. The growing demand for logistics services, right, shipping, is so great that humans are not creating drivers fast enough to meet it. Right? UPS grew by 60% this year. That's a real thing. I actually think that there's a very good chance that when we see autonomous trucks on the road, that doesn't hurt drivers. It helps. And this is why I think that we're a long ways away from a completely unmanned, unmonitored autonomous truck going from A to B. A long time before that, you're going to have a lead truck that's probably going to be largely autonomous, but have a qualified operator in it, that's followed by 3 or 4 other trucks. And now you've got a guy that's not just a truck driver, but has this much greater responsibility and an angle for me to negotiate for a higher wage. So I'm not as concerned about AI as others. You know, when you look around, right, we already talked about how you don't see team drivers anymore. You don't see buggy whips anymore, right? There has been a process of developing technology from the very beginning, and we have still found ways to represent workers, and we will continue, right? The trucks of today will disappear. The work of tomorrow will represent.
Got it. Yeah, because you know, my first thought when I hear that idea of the lead truck driver is like, wait, but what about the drivers of those other 3 trucks? But it sounds like there's already not enough people to drive those trucks, so that's not necessarily taking jobs, it's just fulfilling a need that is there.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Is the growth of demand in the logistics industry is outpacing the ability of this country to supply labor.
Yeah.
Significantly outpacing it.
That is interesting.
This is why workers need to seize the means of production, be controlled industry, as opposed to the dictatorship of the bosses. If we were to democratically control industry, we could use automation to our advantage, and we could collectively decide who benefits from automation as it just entirely benefiting one person, Jeff Bezos.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my thought.
For sure. I think I saw the ghost of Lenin over your shoulder. All right, so there's a question from Charles McConnor that says, Tom, are you aware of the action? Well, are you aware of the actions that Trump has taken to do, or has been trying to do, to the federal employee union or unions?
So I am only very loosely aware in that I've read a couple headlines. I don't represent any federal employees, and I don't pretend to be an expert in anything other than what I do.
Okay.
Right. First, I was a truck driver. Now I represent 30 bargaining groups, and I've had to learn about many, many crafts, but I don't represent any federal employees, and I just don't have the bandwidth to educate myself.
Got it. Okay. And then another question from Alex is, do you believe that with a high enough level of unionization that there wouldn't be a need for a federal minimum wage? Mark, your face.
I mean, with a high enough level of unionization, sure.
But I don't see a reason to
but
get
I'm
rid
not.
of it.
I'm not prepared to stipulate to that. Like,
Yeah, right. Like,
it's wouldn't that be great, right? I think with a high enough level of human integrity, we wouldn't need unions, period. Right?
Yeah, we'll get to work on that one. I think we've been working in the other direction. All right, let's see. Okay, so William's back with the more digestible form of this question, which is, which I think you did a little bit, but yeah, how do you sell unions as a more pure form of capitalism rather than allow them to be labeled as socialist?
Okay, I'm going to take a shot at this. Here we go. Labor, right, and labor unions are selling a product, right? And we believe that we sell an incredibly valuable and irreplaceable product. I also believe that I represent a very skilled workforce. If you want access to that very skilled workforce, then I'm going to make you negotiate with me, and we're going to have a contract, right? Another thing that people miss when they talk about, well, I don't want to join a union. There's a contract that exists between the labor union, right, the workers at that, at that company and the company. And frequently, almost always, one of the first things in that contract is an agreement that the company will not hire people that are not members of that organization. And that's contracting, right? That is capitalism. You're asking me to put a square peg in kind of a round hole. It's not an easy fit. And part of that's because, quite honestly, I don't spend a lot of time on this concern. I spend more time, fighting the unions aren't socialist deal, and unions aren't explicitly anti-capital. Because it's true. Like, we want employers to succeed. We want the employers to grow, because when the business grows, it hires more employees, which means hires more, of my members. The union grows. Everybody grows together, right? The 30s are not now. We're not breaking car companies because they pissed us off, right? We're incentivizing good behavior, and we're helping car companies grow so that they hire more union members. So it does fit into a capitalist mold in that, we want businesses to grow, but it fits in a regulated capitalist mold because we want businesses to grow responsibly and pay their workers for, their share of the value that they create. I hope that answers your question, because that's all I got.
Great. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of it. Thank you both so much for, spending this time. And, thank you for any viewers who stuck with us through the whole thing. This is, going to be recorded, so it'll be on our page as well. I'm going to try and get it up on YouTube sooner rather than later. And yeah, any last things you guys want to say?
I'm really bummed out that we didn't get. I feel like we can't have gotten all the questions. I felt like that chat was moving pretty quick. I don't want anyone to feel left out. But if you have a question, I'm not hard to find. I'm not on Facebook. You will not find me on Facebook. But
in the chat.
My phone number. Yeah, my phone number. Mark's phone number is in the chat. My phone number is on the Local 665 website. And this is the sort of thing I like to talk about when I'm not screaming at an employer for doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. I hope anyone who is currently, if you're working at a boss, or if you're working at a job and it sucks and your boss is exploiting you, please form a union. It'll help.
Let's go. Form a union for your community.
Yeah.
Raise other people's wages.
Yeah.
A rising tide lifts all boats.
Cool. And with that, I think we're gonna bring it to an end.